The yellow bus wound through the almond orchards like a tired snake, dust trailing behind its wheels in a hazy cloud that caught the afternoon sun. July 15th, 1976. The heat in California's Central Valley pressed down on everything, making the air shimmer and dance above the asphalt. Inside bus number 14, 26 children ranging from 5 to 14 years old sang songs, traded baseball cards, at ease, and counted down the minutes until they could jump into backyard pools or chase down ice cream trucks. Frank Edward Ray, 55 years old, veteran driver with 14 years of perfect service records, kept his eyes on the road ahead. The route from Dairyland Elementary Summer School in Chowchilla was as familiar to him as his own driveway. Avenue 21 stretched ahead, flanked on both sides by farmland that seemed to go on forever. Row after row of trees, irrigation ditches cutting through the fields, the occasional farmhouse sitting back from the road like a lonely sentinel. Behind him, the children were restless with that particular brand of summer afternoon energy. Monica Harper, 8 years old with gap-toothed smile and pigtails, was showing her best friend Andrea Wilkes a drawing she had made in art class. 2 rows back, 12-year-old twins Bobby and Larry Park were arm wrestling across the aisle while other kids placed imaginary bets on who would win. Little Timmy Fletcher, the youngest at 5, sat near the front because he got carsick in the back, clutching his superhero lunchbox and watching the world slide past the windows. It was 3:45 in the afternoon when Frank noticed the white van parked awkwardly across the road ahead. At first, he thought maybe it was engine trouble. Rural roads like this one saw their share of breakdowns. The van sat at an angle that blocked both lanes, looking like it had just stopped there without warning. Frank eased his foot off the gas pedal, letting the bus slow gradually. He could see a man standing near the van, waving his arms. Behind him, the children barely noticed the change in speed. They were too busy being young and alive and certain that nothing bad could ever happen on a sunny Thursday afternoon. Frank brought the bus to a complete stop about 30 feet from the van. He engaged the parking brake, that familiar mechanical sound, and turned in his seat to address his passengers with the voice he always used when he needed their attention. "Stay in your seats, everyone. Looks like someone needs help up ahead." He stood, grabbed the handle, and pushed open the folding door. The heat hit him immediately as he stepped down onto the road. That dry valley heat that baked everything. He walked toward the man by the van, already planning how they could move it out of the way. Maybe push it to the shoulder. Probably just overheated engine. Happened all the time out here. The man was wearing dark clothing despite the heat. Sunglasses covered his eyes. Something about his posture made Frank slow his approach, some instinct whispering warnings that his conscious mind hadn't caught up to yet. That was when 2 more men appeared from behind the van. They were wearing nylon stockings over their faces, distorting their features into something nightmarish. Both held guns. Frank Edward Ray had fought in Korea. He knew weapons when he saw them. His heart, which had been beating normally just seconds before, suddenly hammered against his ribs. Time did that strange thing where it slowed down and sped up simultaneously. He could see every detail with crystal clarity, but his thoughts came too slow to match what his eyes were showing him. One of the men moved toward him fast, covering the distance in quick strides. The gun barrel looked enormous up close, like staring down a tunnel. The man's voice came muffled through the stocking. "Back on the bus. Now, don't make a sound or the kids die." Behind him, through the open door of the bus, Frank could hear Monica Harper laughing at something. That innocent sound in the face of what was happening felt like reality itself was breaking apart. He raised his hands slowly, took a step backward, then another. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, just don't hurt them." The men moved together like they had rehearsed this, like they had planned every single second. The first one kept his gun trained on Frank while the other 2 moved toward the bus. Frank wanted to run, wanted to fight, wanted to do anything except let these men near his children. But the gun was right there, and he knew with absolute certainty that they would shoot him and then do whatever they wanted anyway. He backed up the steps into the bus. The moment he crossed the threshold, the atmosphere inside changed. The children saw the men with guns, saw the distorted faces, The singing stopped. The laughter died. In the space of a single heartbeat, their world transformed from summer afternoon safety into waking nightmare. Little Timmy Fletcher started crying first, a high-pitched wail of pure terror. Quiet, one of the gunmen barked, hauling himself up into the bus behind Frank. Everyone shut up and sit down. But children that age do not always follow orders when they are scared. Several of the younger ones started crying too. Monica Harper grabbed Andrea Wilkes and held on tight. Bobby Park instinctively moved to shield his twin brother. The oldest kids, the teenagers who were starting to understand how bad this could get, sat frozen in their seats with eyes wide. The second gunman climbed aboard. The third stayed outside, weapon drawn, scanning the empty road in both directions. These were not amateurs. These were men who had thought this through. "Drive," the first gunman told Frank, gesturing with the gun toward the driver's seat. "Follow the van. Do exactly what we tell you. Anyone tries to be a hero, we shoot them. You understand?" Frank nodded. His mouth had gone completely dry. He lowered himself into the driver's seat with hands that shook despite his efforts to control them. The white van ahead started moving, pulling off to the side to clear the road, then rolling forward. Frank released the parking brake, put the bus in gear, and followed. Avenue 21 disappeared behind them. The van led them onto Avenue 18, then onto smaller farm roads that Frank recognized but had never driven. They passed fields where workers bent over crops, people who glanced up at the yellow bus and thought nothing of it because what could be more normal than a school bus driving through the valley on a summer afternoon. Inside bus number 14, 26 children sat in complete silence now, except for the occasional sob quickly stifled. The two gunmen stood in the aisle, weapons visible, watching every child and watching Frank. Minutes crawled past like hours. The sun continued its slow descent toward the western horizon. They drove for 11 miles that felt like 1100. Finally, the van turned onto an unmarked dirt road that cut between abandoned fields. Tall weeds grew up on either side. An old wooden fence sagged and leaned, broken in places. The van led them deeper into nowhere, dust billowing up around both vehicles. Then the van stopped at what looked like an abandoned quarry or some kind of old construction site. Frank stopped the bus behind it. His mind raced through possibilities. They wanted the bus. They were going to rob them? Hold them for ransom? Every scenario he imagined ended badly, but he could not stop trying to find some answer that made sense. "Out," the first gunman ordered. "Everyone out. Line up beside the bus. Do it now." The children moved like sleepwalkers, terrified into compliance. They filed down the aisle and out the door where the third gunman waited. Frank came last, herded by the men with guns. Outside, the 26 children stood in a ragged line in the dirt and the weeds, holding hands when they could reach each other, crying softly. Two more vans waited there, dark blue ones, their rear doors open like mouths. In the vans, the gunman ordered, "All of you, move. Muskaringo. Battery, move. When again." Monica Harper clutched Andrea Wilkes tighter. "I want my mom," she whispered, but no one answered her because there was no answer to give. They were loaded into the vans like cargo, 13 children in each vehicle, packed in tight with barely room to sit. Frank Ray tried to position himself near the youngest ones, tried to offer what little protection or comfort his presence might provide. The doors slammed shut, cutting off the sunlight, leaving them in hot dimness lit only by the cracks around the door edges. Engines started. The vans began moving again, and in the darkness inside, 26 children and one bus driver tried to comprehend what was happening to them. The vans drove for what felt like an eternity. With no windows and no sense of direction, time became meaningless, and the children clung to each other. Some prayed, some cried. Some went very quiet in the way that children do when fear becomes too large to express. Frank talked to them in the darkness, his voice steady despite the terror in his own chest. "We are going to be okay. Your parents are going to find us. The police are going to find us. We just need to stay calm and stay together." He did not believe his own words entirely, But he said them anyway, because what else could he do? Hours passed. The heat inside the vans became suffocating. The younger children begged for water. The vans kept moving, stopping occasionally, turning, the sounds of the world outside muffled and distorted. Then, finally, the vans stopped. The engines cut off. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise had been. They waited, listening. Footsteps outside, voices too low to make out words. Then the doors opened and flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Out came the command. Everyone out. Single file. They climbed out into what looked like a completely different place than where they had been loaded. It was darker now. Late evening. The sky overhead was that deep purple color that comes just after sunset. They were in some kind of industrial area, surrounded by old buildings and equipment. A single light illuminated what looked like a rock quarry, shadows pooling in every direction. But what captured everyone's attention, what made Frank Edward Ray's blood turn to ice in his veins, was the hole in the ground ahead of them. It was perhaps 30 feet long by 6 feet wide. A rectangular opening into the earth. Beside it sat what looked like a massive moving truck, the kind used to transport furniture, but this one had been modified, reinforced, prepared. The gunmen gestured with their weapons. Down, everyone down into the truck. Only then did Frank understand the full scope of the horror. The moving truck had been buried. Someone had dug this hole, lowered the truck into it, and now they were going to put 27 people inside and cover them up. Bury them alive. No, Frank said, the word coming out before he could stop it. Please. They are just children. Whatever you want, I will do it. Just please. The butt of a gun caught him across the side of his head. The pain exploded through his skull and he went down hard, tasting blood and dirt. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard the children screaming. Anyone else want to argue? One of the gunmen shouted over the chaos. No one answered. How could they? They were forced down into the hole, one by one, climbing down a ladder that had been left there for this exact purpose. Frank went first, despite the blood running down his face, desperate to be there to catch anyone who fell, to provide some kind of support. The children followed, terrified, some of them having to be physically carried by the older kids. The inside of the buried moving truck was surreal. Batteries and fans had been installed, providing dim light and minimal air circulation. Mattresses covered the floor. Jugs of water sat in one corner, loaves of bread. A makeshift toilet behind a curtain. Someone had prepared this prison with the basic necessities to keep them alive, at least for a while. But alive and buried are two different things. When all 27 of them were inside, the gunman climbed back up. Frank looked up through the opening, seeing sky and stars, knowing with sick certainty what was about to happen. Wait, he called up. Why are you doing this? What do you want? One of the stockinged faces appeared in the opening above, looking down at them. For a moment, Frank thought he might answer. Then the man simply disappeared. Massive wooden covers slid over the opening, blocking out the sky. Then came the sound of something heavy being placed on top, then another sound. The unmistakable sound of dirt hitting wood. They were shoveling earth over the truck, burying them completely. The children screamed. Frank wrapped his arms around as many as he could reach, holding them tight, trying to be strong when everything inside him wanted to break apart. The sounds from above continued for a long time. Shoveling, heavy footsteps, more weight being added, then, eventually, silence. Complete and total silence. They were underground, buried alive. 26 children and one bus driver, sealed in a moving truck beneath the earth with limited air and no way out. In the dim battery-powered light, Frank Edward Ray looked at the terrified faces around him and knew that if they did not find a way to escape, they were going to die down here, and no one knew where they were. No one was coming. The truck was approximately 8 feet tall inside, maybe 25 feet long. Enough space to move around, but not enough for 27 people to be comfortable. The mattresses helped, but the heat was already building. The air felt thick and used. Monica Harper sat with her back against the wall, still holding Andrea Wilkes. "My mom doesn't know where I am," she whispered, and it was somehow the saddest thing Frank had ever heard. "She will find out," Frank told her, even though he had no idea how that could be true. "Everyone is going to be looking for us." But looking where? They could be anywhere. They could be anywhere. Miles from Chowchilla. Miles from the abandoned quarry where they had been transferred. Buried somewhere that might take years to find. Frank forced himself to think clearly despite the pain in his head and the fear in his heart. He examined every inch of their prison. The wooden cover above them was solid, reinforced, with heavy weight on top. The walls of the truck were metal, impossible to breach. The floor was wooden, sitting on the truck bed, which sat on earth. His eyes kept returning to the ceiling, to the place where they had entered. If they could somehow lift that cover, move whatever was on top, dig through the earth, they might have a chance. But how? They had nothing to work with. No tools, no leverage, just their hands and their desperation. The batteries running the fans would not last forever. The air would not last forever. The water and bread might stretch for a few days if they were careful, but then what? The children looked to him for answers, for leadership, for salvation, and Frank Edward Ray had no idea how to give them any of those things. And the first hour underground passed in terrified silence. Then one of the teenage boys, David Keller, 14 years old and tall for his age, moved to sit beside Frank. "We have to get out of here," David said quietly, stating the obvious because sometimes the obvious needs to be stated. "I know," Frank replied. "If we stack the mattresses, if we stand on them, we might be able to reach the cover." Frank looked up at the ceiling again. It was possible. Barely. And then what? "We have maybe 3 feet of dirt on top of us. Maybe more." Lancet. "Maybe more. We would need to lift the cover, push through the earth, hope we can make an opening large enough to crawl through before we run out of air or the dirt collapses on us." David stared at him. "So we are going to die down here?" "No," Frank said firmly. "No, we are not. We are going to try." Because what else could they do? Sit and wait for rescue that might never come? Wait for the air to run out? For the batteries to die? And for hope to fade completely? Frank gathered the oldest children together. Bobby and Larry Park, both 12. David Keller at 14. Jennifer Walsh, 13. He explained his thinking quietly, not wanting to scare the younger ones more than they already were. "We stack the mattresses. We try to reach the cover. We see if we can move it. If we can, we start digging. We take turns because it is going to be exhausting. We do not stop until we are out or until we absolutely cannot continue." "Understood?" They nodded. Young faces set with determination born of terror. They began stacking the mattresses, building a platform in the center of the truck directly beneath where the cover sat overhead. The younger children watched, some of them helping, others too scared to do anything but huddle together. When the mattress stack was complete, Frank climbed up carefully. The surface was unstable, but it held his weight. Standing on top, he could just barely reach the wooden cover with his fingertips. He pushed. Nothing moved. The weight on top was too great. He adjusted his stance and tried again, putting his whole body into it, straining with everything he had. The cover shifted, just slightly, maybe an inch. But it moved. "It will work," he called down to the others. "It is going to take all of us, but it will work." Hope, that dangerous and necessary thing, flickered to life in the darkness. The plan was simple in theory, brutal in execution. They would work in shifts, the strongest pushing upward against the wooden cover while others stabilized the mattress platform below. Every inch they gained would be paid for in sweat and screaming muscles and air that grew thinner with each passing hour. Frank Edward Ray took the first shift, standing atop the precarious stack with David Keller beside him. Both men, 155 and 114, pressed their hands flat against the wood above and pushed with everything they had. And the cover moved another inch, then another. Dirt began trickling down through the gap they were creating, falling onto their faces, into their eyes and mouths. Below them, Bobby Park called out encouragement. "Keep going. You are doing it." But doing it and succeeding were vastly different things. The weight pressing down from above was immense. Whoever had buried them had piled something heavy on top of the cover, then added layers of earth. Every fraction of an inch they lifted required enormous effort, and Frank could feel his strength already beginning to fade. His arms trembled. His shoulders burned. The gash on his head from where the gunman had struck him throbbed in time with his heartbeat. Beside him, David grunted with exertion, his young face twisted in concentration. "Switch," Frank gasped after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes. "We need fresh bodies up here." They climbed down and Larry Park scrambled up with Jennifer Walsh, and the two teenagers positioned themselves and resumed pushing. And the cover lifted another precious inch. More dirt cascaded down. The pile of earth on the floor below grew larger. In the corner, little Timmy Fletcher watched with wide eyes, still clutching his superhero lunchbox like it might somehow save him. Monica Harper had stopped crying and now sat very still, as if by remaining motionless she could somehow make this nightmare disappear. The batteries powering the fans hummed steadily, but Frank knew they would not last. Already the air felt heavier, harder to pull into his lungs. 27 people breathing in an enclosed space underground were consuming oxygen faster than the minimal ventilation could replenish it. Time lost all meaning in the buried truck. There were no windows, no natural light, no way to know if it was night or day above them. Frank tried to keep track by counting shifts, by monitoring the battery levels, but exhaustion was making everything fuzzy around the edges. And the teenage boys and girls rotated through pushing duty, their young bodies more resilient than Frank's aging frame, though he took his turns despite the protests from the older kids. The younger children tried to help by clearing away the dirt that fell, by rationing out water in careful sips, by singing quiet songs to keep spirits from collapsing entirely. Hours crawled past. The cover lifted inch by torturous inch. The gap was perhaps 6 inches now, wide enough that they could see dirt packed solid above it. Whoever had buried them had been thorough, professional. The earth above was compressed and heavy, not loose soil that could be easily scooped away. Frank's hands were raw and bleeding from scraping against the wood. David Keller's shoulders had given out after his 5th shift, and he sat against the wall trying to recover. Bobby and Larry Park were on the mattress platform now, both boys pushing upward with legs braced and faces red from effort. Then disaster struck. The mattress stack shifted suddenly as Larry adjusted his footing. The top mattress slid sideways. Larry windmilled his arms trying to catch balance and failed. He fell hard, crashing down onto the pile of mattresses below and rolling off onto the floor. And the sound of impact echoed in the enclosed space. Larry lay still for 3 heartbeats. 4, 5. Larry. Bobby screamed from above, already scrambling down. Then Larry groaned and moved, rolling onto his side. "I am okay," he managed, though his voice was tight with pain. Got the wind knocked out. But the fall had done more than hurt Larry. It had destabilized their entire operation. The mattresses were scattered now, would need to be restacked, precious time lost. And worse, Frank could hear something in the breathing around him, a wheeze and gasp that suggested the air quality was degrading faster than anticipated. "Everyone stay calm," Frank said, though calm was perhaps too much to ask. "We rebuild and keep going. We are making progress." "Are we?" Jennifer Walsh asked from the shadows, her voice cracking. "How do we know? We could be digging for days and not get anywhere. We could run out of air before we break through." She was voicing what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to say. And the terrible possibility that all this effort was futile, and that they were simply choosing how they would die, rather than whether they would die. Frank looked at her, this 13-year-old girl with dirt streaked across her face and terror in her eyes, and he made a choice, but he chose to lie. "We are going to make it," he said with all the certainty he could manufacture. "I have been in worse situations and survived. We just need to keep working together." It was not entirely a lie. He had been in Korea, had seen combat, had survived things that should have killed him. But this was different. This was children depending on him, innocence in his hands, and the weight of that responsibility was heavier than all the earth above them. They restacked the mattresses with shaking hands. Bobby helped his twin brother to a sitting position against the wall. The rotation resumed. Push, rest, the rhythm of survival. Somewhere in the middle of what Frank estimated was their 8th or 9th hour underground, Andrea Wilkes started hyperventilating. Her breathing came fast and shallow, her eyes rolling back. "She needs air," Monica Harper cried, holding her friend. "Something is wrong." Frank pushed through the exhausted children to reach Andrea. He recognized panic attack compounded by poor air quality. He tilted her head back, tried to slow her breathing, spoke calmly even though his own heart hammered. "Andrea, look at me. Look right at me. Breathe when I breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth. And with me now. With me now." He exaggerated his own breathing, making it slow and deliberate. Andrea's eyes focused on him, locked on, and gradually her breathing began to match his. The panic receded, but the incident shook everyone. It was a stark reminder of how precarious their situation was. The fans sputtered once, twice, then kept running, but the message was clear. Battery power was failing. "We need to move faster," David Keller said, back on the platform, despite his exhausted shoulders. But there was no faster. There was only the pace they could sustain, and even that was slowing as exhaustion claimed them one by one. Frank took another shift at pushing, his hands leaving bloody prints on the wood. The gap was perhaps 10 inches now. Beyond it, packed earth that had to be moved somehow. They tried scraping at it with their hands, but the dirt was too compressed. They needed tools they did not have. Then Bobby Park had an idea. "The truck," he said. "There has to be metal pieces we can use. Something to dig with." They searched their prison with renewed purpose, examining every corner, every surface. In the back they found it. Metal brackets that had been used to secure cargo. With effort they pried one loose. It was not much, maybe 8 inches long and curved, but it was harder than hands and could dig where fingers could not. Frank climbed back onto the platform with the metal bracket clutched in his bleeding hand. He reached up through the gap they had created and began scraping at the earth above. Dirt came loose in small clumps, falling down around him. It was slow work, agonizing work, but it was work that yielded results. He dug until his arm went numb. Then David took over, then Jennifer, then the Park twins working together. They carved into the earth above them, creating a channel, a tunnel, a path to salvation or death. The fans stopped entirely somewhere in the middle of hour 11. The sudden silence was deafening. Without air circulation, the atmosphere inside the truck turned oppressive within minutes. People started coughing, and the younger children whimpered. "Faster," Frank urged, though faster was impossible. "We have to move faster." But the human body has limits. They were reaching theirs. The lack of oxygen made thinking difficult, made movement sluggish. Frank felt himself growing lightheaded, his vision tunneling. Still they dug. Because the alternative was unthinkable. Somewhere around hour 13, Frank lost consciousness briefly. He came to with David Keller shaking him, the boy's face swimming in and out of focus. "Mr. Ray, wake up. Please wake up." Frank blinked, forced himself to focus. Around him, several of the younger children had passed out from oxygen deprivation. The ones still conscious moved like sleepwalkers, their bodies operating on pure instinct, because conscious thought was too difficult. He pulled himself upright, grabbed the metal bracket, climbed the mattresses that seemed impossibly tall now. He reached up through the gap, now perhaps 18 inches wide, and scraped at the earth tunnel they were creating. His hand broke through. For a moment he thought he was hallucinating, and that his oxygen-starved brain was creating false hope. But then he felt it. Air. Moving air, cool and fresh and real. "I am through," he croaked, his voice barely audible. I am through. The words rippled through the buried truck like electricity. Children stirred, eyes opened. Hope, that dangerous thing, surged back to life. But being through and getting out were not the same thing. The hole Frank had made was perhaps the size of his fist, large enough to let fresh air in, small enough that no one could fit through it. They needed to make it bigger, much bigger, and they needed to do it with the last reserves of strength they possessed. Frank dug with renewed fury, his hands working the metal bracket like a madman. Dirt fell in cascades now. The hole widened. 6 inches, 8 inches, 10. David joined him, both of them working side by side, scraping and clawing and digging with everything they had left. The opening grew. 12 inches, 14, 16. Made gun. Fresh air poured in through the gap, sweet and life-giving. Below them, children gasped and coughed and began to revive. Frank could hear crying now, but it was different crying. Relief instead of despair. 20 inches. 24. The opening was large enough now that Frank could see sky beyond it. Night sky, stars shining overhead, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Start passing the children up, he called down. Smallest ones first. We are getting out of here. They formed a human chain. The conscious teenagers lifted the younger children up to the platform. Frank and David pulled them higher, positioning them at the opening. Little Timmy Fletcher went first, his small body fitting easily through the gap. Frank pushed him up and out, felt hands from above grab him, pull him to safety. One by one, the children emerged from their grave. That Monica Harper and Andrea Wilkes together, refusing to be separated. The Park twins, helping each other despite their exhaustion. Jennifer Walsh, covered in dirt and blood, but alive. So beautifully alive. 15 children out. 16. 20. Frank's arms were failing, his body shutting down, but he refused to stop. Every child that emerged was a victory against the monsters who had done this. Every breath of fresh air was defiance against a death sentence. 23 children out. 24. 25. 26. Frank remained below. He looked up at the opening, at the stars beyond, and tried to calculate if he had enough strength left to pull himself out. His arms felt like dead weight. His legs trembled. Every part of him screamed for rest. David Keller's face appeared in the opening. Mr. Ray, come on. Reach up. Frank positioned himself on the mattresses, crouched and jumped. His hands caught the edge of the opening. David grabbed one wrist, Bobby Park grabbed the other. Together they pulled. Frank's body scraped against dirt and wood and metal, but he was moving upward, inch by inch, until finally he broke free from the earth and rolled onto solid ground under the stars. For a long moment he just lay there breathing. Real air, clean air, free air. Around him, 26 children sat or lay in the dirt, all of them staring at the hole they had climbed out of, as if it might pull them back down. They were in what looked like a rock quarry, industrial equipment hulking in the shadows, but Frank did not recognize the location. Where are we? Jennifer Walsh whispered. Frank had no answer, but he knew they needed to move, needed to find help, needed to get these children to safety before their captors realized what had happened. He forced himself to stand on shaking legs. Can everyone walk? Various nods and murmurs of assent, though several of the younger children would need to be carried. They organized themselves, the older kids helping the younger ones, and began moving through the quarry toward what looked like lights in the distance. They walked for what felt like miles but was probably less than one, a ragged group of dirt-covered, exhausted survivors stumbling through the darkness. Several times Frank had to stop and rest, his body on the verge of complete shutdown. But each time he looked at the children around him and found the strength to continue. Finally they reached a road, a real road with asphalt and painted lines. In the distance, headlights approached. Frank stepped into the middle of the road, waving his arms. The car, an old Ford sedan, screeched to a stop. A man leaned out the window, his face going pale as he saw the crowd of filthy, injured children behind Frank. What in God's name? We need police, Frank managed. Ambulances. We were kidnapped. Buried alive. Please. The man stared for another moment, then seemed to shake himself out of shock. Get in, all of you. There is a gas station half a mile up. They have a phone. They piled into and onto the car, children sitting on laps, holding onto the roof, too exhausted to care about safety regulations. The man drove carefully, constantly checking his mirrors, as if afraid this was some kind of nightmare that would disappear. The gas station appeared ahead, fluorescent lights harsh and bright and wonderful. The car pulled in and children spilled out. The attendant, a young woman maybe 20 years old, dropped the squeegee she was holding and ran inside to call for help. Within minutes, the parking lot filled with police cars and ambulances, sirens wailing, lights flashing. The officers and paramedics swarmed around the children, wrapping them in blankets, checking vital signs, asking questions that the children were too exhausted to answer coherently. Frank sat on the curb watching it all, feeling detached from his own body. A paramedic tried to examine the gash on his head, but he waved her away. Not until every child was looked at first. The police officer crouched beside him, notepad in hand. "Sir, I need you to tell me what happened. Where you have been. Who did this?" Frank tried to organize his thoughts into something coherent. 3 men. Masks. Guns. They stopped the bus, made us drive to a quarry, transferred us to vans. Drove for hours. Then they buried us in a truck. Underground. Underground. The officer's face went pale. "Buried you? For how long?" Frank looked at his watch, surprised it still worked. The time read 5:30 in the morning. He tried to calculate backward. They had been taken at 3:45 yesterday afternoon, and that meant 16 hours, he said numbly. "We were buried for 16 hours. The officer wrote frantically. "And where is this truck? Where were you buried?" "I do not know," Frank admitted. "We walked from the quarry to the road, but I do not know where the quarry is." The officer stood, called over other officers. Within moments, a full-scale search was being organized. Helicopters were scrambled. Search teams deployed. They would find the burial site, find evidence, find something that would lead them to the men who had done this. But for now, for this moment, all that mattered was that 27 people who should have died were alive. Across the parking lot, Frank watched as Monica Harper was reunited with her parents. The mother collapsed to her knees, sobbing, holding her daughter like she would never let go. The father wrapped his arms around both of them, his shoulders shaking. Other parents were arriving now, having gotten word, their faces showing every emotion from relief to rage to disbelief. The Park twins' mother arrived and gathered both boys into her arms, checking them over and over as if she could not believe they were real. Andrea Wilkes' father picked her up despite her age and carried her to the ambulance, whispering things Frank could not hear but could imagine. Little Timmy Fletcher's parents arrived together, still in their work clothes, and the reunion was so raw and emotional that even the hardened police officers had to look away. One by one, every child was claimed by frantic family members. Every child except the driver, who sat on the curb watching it all and feeling the weight of 16 hours finally crash down on him. But the detective approached older man with kind eyes. "Mr. Ray, I am Detective William Morrison. I need to ask you more detailed questions, but first I want you to know what you did. Well, you saved those kids, every single one of them. You are a hero." Frank shook his head slowly. "I am just a bus driver who did what needed to be done." "No, sir," Morrison said firmly. "You are a lot more than that." The sun was rising now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. A new day beginning. A day that 27 people almost did not see. In the days that followed, the story would dominate every newspaper and television broadcast in the country. And the buried school bus. The miraculous escape. The 3 men who vanished without a trace after committing one of the most audacious crimes in California history. Investigators would find the burial site exactly where Frank described it. They would discover that the kidnappers had demanded $5 million in ransom, had planned to negotiate once the victims were secured underground. But something had gone wrong with their plan. some communication breakdown, and they had fled before making contact. Months later, they would be caught. Of 3 men from wealthy families in the Bay Area, their names eventually released to the public, their motives still murky and disturbing. They would go to trial. They would be convicted. They would spend decades in prison. But that was later. In this moment, as the sun rose over a gas station parking lot where 26 children and 1 bus driver stood wrapped in blankets and surrounded by people who loved them, and the only thing that mattered was survival, Frank Edward Ray would carry the scars of that day for the rest of his life. The nightmares would come, the panic at enclosed spaces, the weight of what could have happened if any single thing had gone differently. But he would also carry something else. The memory of 26 children climbing out of the earth into starlight. The sound of their laughter when they realized they were truly safe. The gratitude in their parents' eyes. Some stories end in tragedy. Some end in justice delayed but eventually served. This story ended with dirt under fingernails and blood on hands and 27 people breathing free air under a California sky. Alive against all odds, but together against the darkness. The yellow bus would never be recovered from where the kidnappers had abandoned it. But it did not matter. Frank Edward Ray had brought every child home, not in the bus he was supposed to drive, but through sheer determination and desperate hope and 16 hours of digging toward impossible freedom. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. And as the last of the children were loaded into ambulances and reunited with their families, as the police continued their investigation and the media descended like locusts, Frank sat in the back of an ambulance and finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of what they had survived. A paramedic cleaned the wound on his head. A detective took his statement. A reporter tried to push a microphone in his face until an officer moved them away. But through it all, Frank kept his eyes on the eastern horizon where the sun continued its climb into morning sky. They had been buried in darkness, but they had climbed toward light, and light had won.